Hello and a warm welcome to a session of community medicine once again in continuation of the previous discussion we had over general epidemiology from Professor Dr. Aditi Aikad here. So let's begin with the second part. In our first session on general epidemiology, we had discussed about the basics of epidemiology, what it is, what are the basic concepts of an epidemiologist in the field, the different epidemiologic tools of measurement, and the different measures of morbidity, mortality, and so on. And we also tried developing a certain understanding about the different time trends. But this time, we are going to take up one of the most important issues in epidemiology, that is the different epidemiologic methods that are made in use. Well, epidemiologic methods basically are varied depending upon the question that you're asking, what you're looking for. It is the who's, the when's, the how's, the which and what's that are looked into and then analyzed and finally compared to get a understanding of the scenario that we are looking into. And for this, we use different types of study. And these studies are carried out in different study settings, among different study population, and also adapting different study designs. Let's see whether we can make a clear understanding of that. What do you see here? It's a banquet spread, and a lavish one. The different dishes spread out in different types of utensils, serving bowls, serving plates. But did they occur in a jiffy? Certainly not. It needed a setting, that is a kitchen. You needed a proper setting to carry this out. So with this kitchen and then this ingredients, the raw materials, that you progressed further. But just with the raw materials, you couldn't have probably done the cooking. You need the proper utensils for doing the proper job. You can't use the whisker for cooking up the curry. Again, you can't use a grater to whisk up the egg. So for each instrument, there is a definite role to play. And then only can serve up such fantastic dishes. And finally, all together put up this banquet. So in the understanding of epidemiology, the setting is also varied. It could be a rural setting, it can be a completely urban setting, and each has their own characteristics, own set of advantages and own set of disadvantages. And the epidemiologist is the person who looks at the community in its entirety, and sometimes, as the very famous John Snow incident way back, just the removal of a handle of a water pump was enough to stop an epidemic. This is as simple as that. It wasn't about the medicines, it wasn't about the health care, it was about the public health step taken at that point of time. And that has been a historical movement, and hence we call John Snow the father of public health. So what is this epidemiological studies done and what are the objectives behind this? Any epidemiological study, it is very important that it is valid. When we say valid, it means that it is supposed to measure what it is intended for. And in this validity, we look for two types of validity. There's external validity Another is the internal validity. These are concepts that reflect whether or not the results of the study are trustworthy and meaningful and can be applied in real life in a larger scale. So what is external validity? It is about obtaining an estimate that is generalizable to relevant target population. When we do a study, we hardly do it in the entire population. A sample, that is a portion from the population, is taken and then the study is carried out. If the sample is representative enough, that is the portion of the population, of the target population which you are working upon, your study population is representative enough of the target population, then one can obtain data that is applicable in a larger scale to that particular target population. That is what we call when I say that generalizable. Apart from the fact that it should be externally valid, that is, the data generated, the conclusion made can be applied to a larger scale from the community from which the study population is taken. And it also has to be internally valid. What is this internal validity about? It is about obtaining an accurate estimate of the disease frequency and effect of exposure on health outcomes in the study population. That is, it measures accurately the disease picture in question in that particular study population. So how near it is to the true picture. That is how internally valid the study is. But in all these efforts to get the study valid, both externally and internally, there are always chances of errors to creep in. Now again, these errors can be basically of two types. One is the random error, which we call as chance. And then there is the systematic error, which is called the bias. The random error is such an error which can be associated with any of the study population members, be it the case, be it the control. Everybody stands an equal chance of getting into the error. That is called chance. The systematic error is due to the error in the different parts of the study, be it its design stage, be it in the analysis stage, and can be of different types. It is popularly known as the bias, which we will discuss in length. Now let us look at the different epidemiologic studies. The first question one should be asking before assigning any study as X or Y type of study is the researcher doing any intervention? Are they assigning any exposure? If any intervention is used, supposing you are making a health education intervention, then it becomes an experimental study. If there is no intervention, you're merely observing. It is called an observational study. But in this experimental study, again, if the chance of this intervention application is equal to all the participants in the study population, that is random in nature, that is allocation, it is called a randomized control trial. But if it is decided from part of the researcher that okay, this particular group will get this intervention, then it's no longer random and it is called a non-randomized control trial. Now coming back to the observational study, the next question that we need to ask is there any comparison group? So if there is a comparison group, it is termed as an analytical study. If there is no comparison group, then it is called a descriptive study. The descriptive study is mostly focused on generating the hypothesis, and the analytical study is about testing that hypothesis that was generated by the descriptive study. So, in analytical study, the individual when taken as a unit, the types of studies are case control, cohort, and cross-sectional. But when again in the analytical study, the population is taken as a unit, then as the ecological studies. Now coming to the experimental studies. Here, the patients are taken as the unit. When the healthy people is taken as unit, it is called field trials. When community is taken as a unit, it is called a unity trial. Now looking at the hierarchy of the epidemiological study design. So what is the weightage of the evidence of each of these studies? As you can see, in the very bottom of the pyramid is the case report. Because though it is of significance, it carries much less significance of generalizing into the community as such. A case series which is at a higher tier, it is usually when at least 10 or more cases are reported in a series. Definitely stands a higher chance and a greater weightage of evidence. Then is the ecological studies and the cross-sectional studies. Coming to the analytical epidemiology, the case control, retrospective cohort, prospective cohort have increasingly greater weightage of evidence for any formulation of any analysis of the hypothesis to be true, with randomized clinical trials and meta-analysis topping the pyramid, being at the apex of it. So if we see the validity as we discussed earlier, it is lowest in case report or case series, and the cost involved is also lowest. But as we go up the graph, we find that the randomized control trial have the highest cost involved, but the greatest validity, with systematic review or meta-analysis having less cost but a very high validity. Now let us discuss about the analytical studies. These involve the case control studies, cohort study, cross-sectional studies, and the population-based logical studies. Let's get a visual of these two, comparing cross-sectional study and the longitudinal study. In cross-sectional study, what we do, we compare different groups at the same time frame, like group 1, group 2, and group 3 in this particular visual. So they are different groups, but we are studying at the same point of time. So as though we are taking a cross-section of that particular populations at that point of time. A longitudinal study is about studying the same group over a much longer time frame. Now let us look at the cohort study and get an understanding of it. A cohort study follows a group of individuals over time to observe the impact of a known exposure. See, here we are studying the people with or without the exposure. So let us presume this group of individuals are our study population. So of them, one of them will form the cohort number 1, which is the exposed. Then another cohort will be formed, which is about the non-exposed. In this exposed group, some will develop disease and some will have no disease. Similarly, in the non-exposed cohort, there will be some with disease and some will not develop disease. But the chances of those being exposed having the disease would be apparently higher, as that is our presumed hypothesis. One of the most notable cohort studies is the Framingham Heart Study, and the other one is the Nurses Health Study. Now let's have an understanding of the case control study. The case control studies begin by identifying a patient with a particular outcome, a specific disease. The patient's exposures are then retrospectively assessed. So if these are the cases and these are the control, the cases, the diseases are present. In the control, the diseases are absent. In the cases, when we look at retrospectively, we may find that exposure are present among some and exposure is absent in some. Similarly, in the control, we might see the exposures are present in some and exposures are absent in some. So in the cohort, we are looking at the presence or absence of or development of the disease. And in the case control, we are retrospectively looking and finding out the presence or absence of exposure. So let's have a comparative look at it. The case control moves from effect to cause, that is a retrospective, and cohort goes from cause to effect, usually that's particularly in the prospective cohort. The case control starts with a disease and cohort study starts with people exposed to risk factor, that is it looks into the exposure. The case control study tests whether the suspected factor associated more with the disease, and cohort study tests whether the disease occur more in those who are exposed to the risk factor. The case control study, the first approach to testing the hypothesis, and cohort is reserved for precisely formulated hypothesis. Case control has fewer number of objects and cohort has large number of subjects. Case control is more suited for rare disease and cohort study is inappropriate when the exposure is rare. Case control, the risk estimation is with odds ratio and cohort is with relative risk and attributable risk. Case control is obviously inexpensive in nature usually, and cohort study is generally expensive. Now, how can we estimate the disease risk in a case control study? In fact, this is one of the very popular questions in the long question category in your examination. That how can we estimate the disease risk in case control study? And usually the part that accompanies is about the biases in the case control study and how to eliminate those. Epidemiological investigations like case control study can provide strong evidence linking exposure to the incidence of infection or disease in a population. They can also provide estimates of the magnitude of risk related to a particular level of exposure or dose. They can quantify the probability that observed relationship occurred by chance factors, and they also have the potential to control for other risk factors or confounders of the outcome illness being studied. So with all this said, the estimation of disease risk associated with exposure is obtained by odds ratio, that is OR. This measures the strength of association between the risk factor and the outcome in rare diseases with low incidence and representative sample. Let's understand what is an odds ratio about. An odds ratio represents the odds that an outcome will occur given a particular exposure compared to the odds of the outcome occurring in the absence of that exposure. So if you look at this 2x2 table, in which one side we have the exposed and unexposed, and in the other side we have the disease and the no disease, that is the cases and the controls. So the group A represents the exposed people who are diseased. That is the exposed case or A. Then B is the exposed non-case and C is the unexposed case and D represents the unexposed non-case. And odds ratio is nothing but the number of exposed cases multiplied by the number of unexposed non-cases divided by the exposed non-cases multiplied by the unexposed cases, that is AD divided by BC. So when the odds ratio is equal to 1 means exposure doesn't affect the odds of outcome, and when the odds ratio is greater than 1 it means exposure associated with the higher odds of outcome, that there is a greater possibility that they are associated. and the odds ratio is less than 1, it means exposure is associated with lower odds of outcome. Now let us talk about the one that we started discussing in the very beginning during discussing the epidemiologic methods, that is bias. That are one of the threats to the validity of a epidemiologic method. So what it is any systematic error that results in an incorrect estimate of the association between exposure and the disease. The case control studies are particularly susceptible because of the retrospective nature of the data and the resulting lack of control of the investigator over that data flow. Now, what are the different types of bias? This is basically classified into 4 types: the selection bias, the information bias, confounding bias, and the Bergsonian bias. Well, let me tell you again that bias has been differently classified by different authors, but this is the usual pattern that we follow in our examination. So coming to the selection bias, this occurs when the sample selection is not representative. Supposing I am trying to look at the health characteristics of medical students, and then I collect a sample from the nursing students as well. So this sample selection is biased because it is not representative. It is a selection bias. And it could also be so that not only my sampling frame is wrong here, it could be also so that I am only selecting those with whom I am familiar, and hence incorporating a bias in the process of selection. And this can be eliminated by the process called randomization. What is randomization? Randomization is a process whereby each of these subjects have equal chance of being selected in the process. So when I do randomization in that particular situation we're discussing, there every student has equal chance of being selected into the study process. So thereby I'm not being biased in selecting a particular few with whom I am familiar. Now coming to the second type of bias, that is information bias. This can again be of various types. Firstly, the interviewer bias. It is generated by inappropriate method of gathering information, leading to systematic error. This more creeps in when I am driven as an interviewer with a particular hypothesis at the back of my mind, and I want that to be established. Hence, my questions are often, in such a manner that it prompts the interviewee to answer favorably to my question. And this is eliminated by the process called blinding. And this blinding may be single, double, or triple. Remember, blinding also comes as a short note in your examination. When I call single blinding, then the patient doesn't know that what treatment is being mated to him or her. When I call double, the person who is applying the health intervention doesn't know to which patient he is assigning which mode of intervention. And in the triple blinding, even those who are analyzing are unaware what the process way. Now coming to the another type of information bias, that is the recall bias. It is the cases who are aware of their disease status are more likely to remember the events, and being retrospective in nature, there may be partial or erroneous recollection. For you students, it is easier for you to associate with the 24 hours recall method diet survey that you carry out in the community, and you often see the lady of the house sometimes is not able to recollect exactly the items, exactly the amount that they have consumed. Why? Because of the recall bias, they sometimes give you information which is distorted. Now coming to another form of information bias, which is popularly known as the Hawthorne effect. Again, Hawthorne effect also comes as short note and sometimes used asked in the Viva as well. And even in the PG level, it is given in the MCQs. This Hawthorne effect, in fact, has a historic story associated with it. Typically now it is referred to a type of reactivity in which individuals modify an aspect of their behavior in response to the awareness of being observed. How did it come to effect? The Hawthorne studies were conducted on the workers at Hawthorne plant of the Western Electric Company by Elton Mayo and Fritz Ruethlesberger in the 1920s. They were actually trying to find out the effects of high or low lights on the productivity of the workers in that particular plant, to see that if higher light was making them more productive. So it was part of a refocus on the managerial strategy incorporating the socio-psychological aspects of human behavior in organization. And interestingly, it was found that once this intervention, this study was stopped, and the light, they were found that higher light, they're performing better, and the lights were made higher, the productivity didn't improve. It went down again to the previous level. And a deeper look into it revealed that the workers were actually more responsive to the social factors than the factors like increased lighting or other factors. That their supervisors were giving them importance, looking into their issues, were of higher importance. So this Hawthorne effect is eliminated by careful selection of research questions and choose appropriate data collection method. Now another important ideation which should be very clear in your mind is confounding. So when we say confounding bias, before that you need to know what is confounding. It is usually a factor or a variable that is associated both with the exposure as well as the outcome. If it is associated with the exposure, it without being the consequence of the exposure. If it is associated with the outcome, it should be independent of the exposure. That is, it's not an intermediary. It should be independent yet associated with both exposure and outcome. So if you're looking at maybe alcohol causing a heart disease and the person also consumes coffee, so or smoking, which may also be affecting the outcome and associated with the exposure. So that may lead to an association that does not exist, or may hide an association that exists, or may change the direction of the effect, or may even increase or decrease the strength of association. So understanding confounding would make you get a clearer picture of bias due to confounding. So it is a measure of effective exposure on the risk that is distorted because the association of the exposure with other factor that influence the outcome. So how will you eliminate this confounding bias? It is to be eliminated at different stages in a different way. When it is at the study design stage, that you are still designing the study and yet to carry it out. That is the phase when you can eliminate this confounding by adopting randomization, using matching. That is, you are getting matched cases and controls in terms of their different attributes, and regression, and at the analysis stage using stratification, that is grouping them into different strata and carrying out the analysis, as well as multivariate analysis. Now coming to the fourth one, there is a Bergsonian bias. Remember, this Bergsonian bias is also very common in the exam paper and you should be aware of it. It is nothing but the admission rate bias, and it is about the patients with more than one disease or conditions are more likely to be hospitalized than patients with only one disease or condition. So if a case control study is exploring the relationship between two diseases, this bias can cause an overestimation of exposed cases in the hospital population. Now let us look at the experimental studies. Basically, there are two types: the randomized control trial, consisting of the field trial and community trial and the non-randomized trial. Of them, the common question that comes in your examination is the steps of randomized controlled trial. So let's get a visual of it. First, we have a protocol development. Then we assign the target population. From the target population, we choose the study population. Then there goes the heart of this randomized controlled trial. That is, the randomization is done. That is, of the study population, everyone chance an equal opportunity of getting selected into either the control group or the study group. Then is the manipulation. There may be some intervention or absence of any intervention. And these are to be followed up for final assessment. So what we did? The protocol development with aims and objectives and standard working procedure, that how it will be proceed. And then selecting the reference to target population. This is the population on which we are going to generalize the results. Then selecting the experimental population. That is, who need to give the informed consent and should be representative of the target population and eligible for the clinical trial. And finally, randomization, which I again said, it is the heart of the RCT. It is a statistical procedure by which the study and control groups are allocated, and it eliminates the bias of selection and allows a equal comparability. Then is the manipulation. There is a deliberate application, withdrawal or reduction of suspected causal factors, and following up is nothing but the examination at definite intervals under the same conditions with equal intensity in the same time frame till the final assessment. And of course, then comes to the last part, that is assessing the outcome of the trial in terms of positive or negative results. The bias may arise from errors of assessment of the outcome, which may be subject to variation, the observer bias or bias in evaluation. And to eliminate that, blinding techniques are adopted, which we discussed, can be single, double or triple blind. Let's look at the different questions that we often ask in the vivas, in the short questions, and sometimes in the MCQs in the different entrance examinations. So they can be in the form that prevalence can be calculated by which study design. Incidence can be calculated by which study design, where prevalence is from the cross-sectional study design and incidence, of course, from the cohort. Advantages of case control study are all except useful in rare diseases, cost effective, calculates the relative risk. Well, case control study never yields the relative risk. Which study design finds relative risk? Of course, it is the cohort study. Cross product ratio is calculated from which study design? It is the odds ratio, and it is calculated from the case control. Matching is done for removal of confounding bias at the design stage. So what is the best method for removal of confounding? It is actually randomization. And the best study designed to establish temporality, it is the cohort study. Best temporality is nothing but establishing that the cause precedes the effect. Then Hawthorne bias is associated with which study design? Well, you know it very well now. And what is Berkesonian bias, which is also familiar with you, that it is the admission rate bias. You can always come back to me. Now let us look at these questions. In the definition of epidemiology, distribution refers to all except who, when, and where, and why. Distribution is more about the hypothesis generation. So it is largely related to the whos, whens, and wheres, but not about the whys. The whys is about the determinants. So in the definition of epidemiology, determinants generally does not include agent, causes, control measures, risk factors, and sources. Well, determinants is mainly focusing on the whys. Hence, the control measures are not part. Now let us look at this question. Epidemiology as defined in this lesson would include which of the following activities? Describing the demographic characteristics of a person with acute aflatoxin poisoning in District A, prescribing an antibiotic to treat patient with community-acquired methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus infection, comparing the family history, amount of exercise and eating habits of those without newly diagnosed diabetes, recommending that a restaurant be closed after implicating it as a source of hepatitis A outbreak. Well, it's for you to assess. Find it out. John Snow's investigation of cholera is described as a model for epidemiologic field investigation because it included all except biologically plausible hypothesis, comparison of a health outcome among the exposed and unexposed groups, multivariate statistical model, spot map, and recommendation for public health action. Why? Because it had the proper recommendation for public health action. It had spot maps. It compared the health outcome of exposed and unexposed groups. And it didn't include the multivariate statistical model. So that's the answer. The hallmark feature of an analytical epidemiologic study is choose one best answer. Use of an appropriate comparison group, laboratory confirmation of the diagnosis, publication in a peer-reviewed journal, and statistical analysis using logistic regression. Well, in the very first, we had discussed the first question to decide analytical epidemiology is whether or not there is a comparison group. So, use of an appropriate comparison group. So, let us say in a women health study, a researcher enrolled 41,837 women in 1986 and collected exposure and lifestyle information to assess the relationship between these factors and subsequent occurrence of cancer. It is an example of which type of study? It is a cohort study carried out among the particular group of women, looking at their characteristics in a prospective manner. A cohort study differs from a case control study in that subjects are enrolled or categorized on the basis of their exposure status in a cohort study, but not in a case control study. Subjects are asked about their exposure status in cohort study, but not in a case control study. Cohort studies require many years to conduct, but case control studies do not. Cohort studies are conducted to investigate chronic disease. Case control studies are used for infectious disease. So, here one has to keep in mind there may be more than one right answers. Check it out. A key feature of a cross-sectional study is that it usually provides information on prevalence rather than incidence. It is limited to health exposures and behaviors rather than the health outcomes. It is more useful for descriptive epidemiology than it is for analytical epidemiology. It is synonymous with snapshot study or survey. Well, it is synonymous with a snapshot study or survey, and it usually provides information on prevalence rather than incidence. The epidemiologic triad of disease causation refers to, of course, goes without saying, it's agent, host, and environment. So a big thank you to all of you for watching this, and if you like it, you can go to my YouTube as well. There you will find plenty of content related to your examination and different other topics as well. It is Dr. Aditya Aikut. You can always fall back on that. Thank you so much and happy studying.